Hi, my name is Sebastian. I'm going to be talking about how to do Gopher over the web. And thank you for joining in the video chat. If I go a little bit too fast or too slow, or if it's not interesting at all, I highly recommend clicking on the link at the bottom or just entering in gopher.commons.host. That's the actual thing that I'm talking about. And I think the only question you're going to have is why. But if you just poke around and browse around the Gopherverse, which is the collection of Gopher sites, then I'm sure you're going to find randomly some interesting things that'll keep you entertained for the next half an hour or so. And otherwise, I'm just going to continue now. So like I said, my name is Sebastian. I'm go by Seb Deckers on most platforms. You feel free to contact me on Twitter, GitHub, GitLab, etc. This is a side project to my side project. I don't have a main project right now since I recently moved to the United States, and it takes a while to be able to get a permission to work and things like that. So I've been focusing on my side project. It was actually an open source CDN based on Node.js. And this is a side project to that, which is to have Gopher support for a CDN. So how do we bring this crazy retro old protocol to the modern web platform, which is what I like to use? How do we save the world by doing so? So the year is 2020. There's a global pandemic. Billions of people are actually under lockdown right now. The numbers are scary. But what that means is that a lot of them are just watching YouTube, Netflix, and like most of you now, Twitch, streaming tons of traffic. So the web is starting to suffer. Things are getting slowed down because there's a huge spike in the demand for bandwidth. So much so that most video streaming services have started rationing feeds to like potato cam quality. And it also means that our own sites are getting affected and slowing down, or at risk of becoming so if this continues to go down the same way. Bad news, the IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force, their 107th meeting was canceled. They usually meet 3 times a year to discuss new protocols and changes. And in this case, that means that the cool stuff that James is working on for Quick and HTTP3, it's not going to save the day. It's not going to make our sites any faster in this problem situation. So it's a disaster. Now, hang on. What does that sound? Oh, I see something coming up. It's a Gopher. All right, bad joke. But Gopher is this ancient protocol from a palindromic year. And I think, tongue in cheek, but I think it might save us. Gopher's fast, right? It has some ridiculous design constraints. It's from a time when computers were really not very powerful. Networks were very limited in terms of bandwidth, latency, all of that. And design constraints usually lead to, or in this case, led to very lightweight content. It's got almost no features as a protocol compared to the things that we're used to today, where we're doing video streaming with codecs and cross-browser stuff. It doesn't even have headers on like requests and responses. It's very minimal. Also, plaintext, most of us are probably developers. Plaintext is king, all right? Plaintext rules. You can do anything with plaintext. You don't need fanciness. You don't need GIFs and all that kind of stuff, but maybe there's a way. Additionally, and this is sort of why some people have started looking at this in more recent years, the user has total control with Gopher. The protocol has a very simple method of operation where you make one request and you get one response. That response doesn't sort of automatically go out and make a whole bunch of other requests for sub-resources like a web page might do. With a web page, you've got all these scripts and images and so on. And that's what like advertisers and other nefarious companies might use to track users and invade privacy and all of that stuff that we don't want. Gopher doesn't support it. It's fantastic. So the problem is browsers don't really support it anymore. They used to, and then they deprecated it because people were just not using enough of it, and the web kind of won in the end. So if only there was a way to make Gopher work on the modern web platform with all its amazing APIs. So I'm going to introduce a couple of things. I'm going to introduce Gaufre, which you can pronounce Gopher or Gaufre, depending on how you like. It's a browser for Gopher, supports all the Gopher features, but it does it inside your web browser. So you can just click a link and it works. You don't have to install anything. Behind the scenes, it's using a protocol proposal, sort of an experimental thing that I've been working with called Gopher over HTTP. where it basically uses a proxy, a very lightweight proxy. And then also Gopher over TLS, because like I mentioned before, I'm working on building a CDN. I want to be able to serve lots of domains, and also security is kind of a must-have, right? So I'm going to talk about that in a bit as well. How do we secure and how to make Gopher ready for the modern age of CDNs and all of that. But first, what is Gopher? Well, I'm not going to do a README talk. You can look it up yourself. Just a couple highlights. It started off as sort of this alternative to the web. It actually originated around the same time as Tim Berners-Lee came up with the www. I think it was slightly later, actually. But yeah, it's like really constrained, and it's still being used by these retro computing fanatics, enthusiasts like myself. So what can it do, right? What do you do with Gopher? How is it useful? Take a look at this. Is on the left-hand side, you see a Gopher menu. On the right-hand side, you see a Gopher map, which is the sort of the source. It's sort of the HTML of Gopher. It's menus. It's very simple syntax. You look at on the right-hand side, it's line by line. So one line renders one line on one line of source code renders one line of menu or text. It's got these little prefixes. Every single line starts with a single character. In most cases, it's an I, which is sort of an informational message. There's a whole bunch of types. It's sort of like MIME types, but for one line, something like that. So links will have a different type. And then there's a tab separated thing where each line starts with a single character that indicates what it shows, then a bunch of text, and then a tab, and then it could be a link, sort of a link within Gopher. It's really simple. It takes you like a minute on Wikipedia to figure it out. It also supports other media types besides these plain text kind of menus. You can do images, you can do audio, you can do video, HTML, PDF, file downloads. So yeah, you can actually do HTML pages over Gopher, which is a funny concept. I've got support for all of them in Gaufre, with sort of very sandboxed kind of environments for all of them, so they don't make additional sub requests, which is sort of a key criteria for me. You could add more, but since it wasn't really standardized very well, it's kind of unofficial. There were other weird experiments that they did in the early days of Gopher, like virtual reality and some protocol extensions called Gopher Plus. I'm not a fan of them. I don't think anyone uses it, so I'm just going to keep it simple. It supports URLs. Whoa, amazing invention, right? Hyperlinking, wow, it's the way of the future. So Gopher URL looks like this. It's really plain and simple. You can put this in a web page and link from a web page to a Gopher page. You can put a HTTP URL in a web page, in a Gopher page, and vice versa, etc. So anyway, what does Gopher mean today? So besides this retro computing thing where people have like a little blog on Gopher called a flog, it's also popular for April Fool's pranks, which is kind of sad but funny. In the post-Snowden era, I think it's kind of starting to make a comeback. But looking at other people on YouTube talking about this, people do see it as a sort of like this weird hackery DIY alternative to the censorship and privacy problems that the web has developed. So how do you use it? Well, there's all these native clients, like native apps for mobile, for desktop, for like DigiDog. I mean, you just look around for your particular platform and you'll find something. A lot of them might be old, maybe not very maintained. And that's where I came in. My favorite platform is the web. So I wanted to make something nice. And I spent a little bit of time doing that. The other way of using it right now is Gopher to HTML, which is really just server-side rendering. The server will act as a Gopher client and then render that content into HTML. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a screenshot of what that looks like. It's a very popular public resource for people to explore Gopher, again, without installing anything. Even curl supports it, so you can curl a Gopher URL. I'm not sure why you'd want to, but it's there. And then what about the web platform? How do we use it? Well, problem is JavaScript doesn't get access to the low-level TCP stack of the operating system. And Gopher is really just very plain text going over TCP on port 70 instead of port 80 like HTTP. So you can't do it. You need a proxy. That's where Gopher over HTTP comes in. And by setting up a little intermediary layer, you can take your HTTP client, which in Gopher, my client's case, is a web browser, but it could be any HTTP client that you might have, like an IoT device or a webhook. And you can reach Gopher from that using a Gopher over HTTP proxy like you see in the middle. So you make an HTTP request, the proxy translates it into a Gopher request, which your Gopher server some of which are very old, receives, responds with a Gopher response, gets translated to an HTTP response, goes back to the HTTP client. Very simple, very lightweight. And so this was inspired by another protocol that came out a couple of years ago, DNS over HTTP. I ended up implementing this about 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. It was a lot of fun, and I kind of wanted to do more along those lines. I love working with protocols. Ended up getting into RFCs and authoring all kinds of stuff. So this was just fun for me as well. One key requirement: I don't want to touch the Gopher protocol. I respect the elders. I'm not going to change anything there. I'm just transporting it over HTTP. And so a Gopher over HTTP request is just an HTTP request that has a header where that has one requirement is a header. The accept header is set to application Gopher, and the query string of the request has to contain this URL field, which is set to just a Gopher URL. So there's an example there. You probably want to URI %encode or whatever the Gopher URL so that it reaches the proxy correctly. And then a Gopher over HTTP response is just an HTTP response that has a header of the content type set to application Gopher. And that's it. And so you can imagine, if you're familiar with Node.js, it's really trivial to create a Gopher HTTP proxy. You just take a HTTP request coming in, you open a TCP connection to whatever URL, hostname and port was specified, and you pipe back what comes out to the client, like from the Gopher server to the client of your HTTP user. Very simple. Let's talk about how that affects Gopher hosting, or the current situation with Gopher hosting, because you won't find that many servers. There used to be actually about 10,000 plus Gopher servers back in the days. Currently, it's about 400, and it's actually rising. It went down to just over 100 a couple of years ago, and now it's up to 400. But one issue that we have in the modern world of IPv4 shortages is that you can only host one domain per IP address. You have one IP address on your server, you have a port 70, and you get a request. You don't know host name it's for, you just see the path of the URL, and so you can only serve one domain, and it's a problem. Because I want to serve maybe lots of Gopher holes. Gopher holes are just Gopher websites. And IPv4 addresses, ran out. It's getting expensive to buy them, and so it's not really scalable in that sense. If you can talk about scalability in Gopher, I don't know. Let's do that anyway. So anyway, the workaround that people have used for years is just have this sort of tilde username in your URL, and you end up with a website, example.com, that provides hosting for people. And then you have that / the type, which is like a menu. And then you have this tilde, and then Alice, tilde, Bob, tilde, foo, font, bar, etc. It's not really pretty. I want to have my own custom domain name because that's cool. Now, how did HTTP solve this? Because back in the early days of HTTP 1.0 and 0.9, it didn't support multiple domains on the single IP address either. HTTP 1.1 actually introduces the host header, and the host header just includes the domain, because the request really just, the first line is just the method get and then / the path, right? And so you have this host header that allows suddenly for servers, web servers, to provide multiple domain names. But Gopher doesn't have headers, so we can't really use that trick. We can't create a new header because there are no headers in Gopher, and we don't want to change the protocol. So we only have this URL path to work with, which means we have to look at another option. And that's where actually solving the encryption problem also provides us with multi-domain hosting. Gopher over TLS is the idea where, again, we don't change Gopher, it's just transporting it. And this is inspired by just plain HTTPS. HTTPS had the same issue and it solved it by basically making the HTTPS client, which is really a TLS client, when it sends its initial message called the ClientHello, it includes the server name identification, which is just the domain name of the server that you're trying to reach. The idea is that a CDN, a content delivery network that's, again, hosting lots of websites, needs to be able to pick the correct TLS certificate to serve the response to that TLS client. And so we can use that SNI, that server name identification, combine it with the Gopher URL, and recompose on the server side the full Gopher URL. And this is sort of what that looks like in a diagram, but it basically means the top side here is a traditional Gopher, and you just have an IP address and a path. And the bottom here is the Gopher over TLS proposal, or the experiment, where you can combine the TLS SNI and the Gopher request path to recreate on the server side the full URL. And now a server that supports TLS, Gopher over TLS rather, can serve any number of domains. And that's, I think, a nice advantage on top of just the encryption. So caveat, I'm trying to do this on the same port for reasons. Port 70, I want to do TLS as well as plaintext, and so I have to just do this probing thing and fall back if it doesn't support it. It all works out in the end, but some people call this a hack, and that has been I think the main reason of objection to this concept. But let's see if it works. So put it all together. Again, I've got this client. It looks like this. It's got colors. Oh my goodness. It's got a dark mode. I went a little crazy on the themes based on whatever music I was listening to on that moment. So that's Gaufre, and you can, if you haven't visited the link yet, gaufre.com is that host, please do so now. You can hear me talk in the background. It's just a single page app. It's one file of HTML. It's like, I think like just over 1,000 lines. There's no dependencies, nothing. It's all just included. And it makes heavy use of the richness of the web platform. Check out the demo. I encourage you to do it yourself. This is what it kind of looks like. On the left-hand side, you see the Gopher browser visiting the Commons host Gopher homepage. So there's a lot of things going on here. It's a bit dense, actually, what's on screen right now, but basically this is the web page that's rendering the Gopher page of the same URL on Gopher protocol, so on port 70 instead of port 443. There's a bunch of things with the headers here. I'm just going to ignore this for now, but you can sort of see it indicates that in blue there's TLS going on. It indicates in green what's happening specifically with Gopher over HTTP, and then the yellow parts is really just standard web platform. That's actually loading the client Gopher. And you see the requests. There's only 3 requests. There's the first one, the yellow request, is the Gopher client itself, so a single page. The browser makes this favicon.png .ping lookup, but that's that aside. And the second request is actually loading the Gopher URL through our GOH proxy. So this is, again, in a diagram what's happening. So you can have this web browser making an HTTP request to our proxy. That's actually available at npm, the Go package, which forwards it as a Gopher request to our Gopher server, which is also available as the Goth package. Goth was already taken, sorry. That response goes back to the proxy, goes back to the browser, right? So a lot of things are actually happening on the same machines, but conceptually, this is how it's structured. And so this is available via Commons host, but I inquire you please be very polite with the infrastructure, because they're very small machines and they're all hosted by kind volunteers and collaborators, contributors to this project. So if you want to do some automated scraping and stuff, please don't do this on this server or these servers. Just run your own. It's all available open source. You can very easily run both Gopher and the proxy locally. These are the steps. I encourage you to try it out, and that will also give you extra privacy, because even though the Commons host service does zero logging, because I couldn't even afford to log in if I wanted to. Your privacy should be protected, but this ultimately guarantees your privacy by running everything locally. So, okay, how do we make Gopher more popular? Well, we got to have content. That's the problem. Or that's the next problem. So, like I mentioned, the Commons host CDN actually has Gopher as a service now, because as a CDN now with these new protocols, it can support multiple domains. It became very easy to serve these static Gopher files. They're super lightweight in terms of bandwidth. And you can deploy, look at the documentation, it's pretty easy to deploy a little Gopher page of your own. Gopher map files, these menus are very easy to create. Alternatively, you can just use any old Gopher server. There's plenty of them out there, lots of platforms, lots of languages, whatever you're comfortable with, lots of tutorials and documentation, videos and everything. The only downsides are you don't get encryption, and you can only host one domain on your IP address. Say that you're running this on a Raspberry Pi at home, which most people seem to do. And then another thing that you might want to look at is this module, the Goth module again, that is a very tiny little Node.js package that gives you a very simple app server to create Gopher apps. So if you want to do something more fanciful, take a look at this. It'll give you support for TLS and plaintext out of the box, and save you that headache and get you started right away. And then finally, I also have a new thing that I've sort of a little bit work in progress, but take a look at it in a couple of days, I guess. A TLS router. So you can have multiple traditional Gopher servers behind a router, which actually terminates the TLS connection on port 70 on TCP, and uses the SNI to sort of locally then branch or fork the connection as a plain text or a plain text Gopher connection to you can have a whole bunch of Gopher servers, each of them serving a single domain but on a different port, and the TLS router would connect them based on the SNI, based on the server name. And so you could use this to use your existing Gopher servers, or if you're more comfortable not building your own server, you could use this, run a bunch of, take a look at Wikipedia, there's a server list there, run a bunch of those locally, and then front them with this TLS router to terminate the TLS clients and give you that virtual hosting capability. So I encourage you all to go forth and burrow as a Gopher. And keep in mind, Gopher is really small, a lot of cool indie stuff, but you can be the first whatever of Gopher. So if you want to be the first, you have this amazing startup idea, you can pitch it as this is something for Gopher, and you'll have zero competition, right? You might have zero customers for now, but let's fix that. Okay, so anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy Gopher.